This is the Outfall.
This is the Outfall.
This is the Outfall,
where water,
infrastructure,
and untold stories meet.
I remember there was one old timer, his name was Mr. Blackwell. He used to live down the road down here, and every year you'd see him. I can't remember what the holiday was. It was Labor Day, Memorial Day, something. And he'd be out there fishing. That was his big day every year. And finally, as the traffic increased on the Chattooga River and they developed the outfitting and guiding business and they started having commercial trips, finally, that guy got tired of answering the question, how many fish have you caught? Are the fish biting? And you never saw him again.
I come back to the wild and scenic nature of the river. The river has largely stayed the same. I mean, there's been a few changes, a few subtle changes that the people who've been here for years and years and years can see. Bull Sluice Rapid has changed a little tiny bit. Either a rock or a log or something moved in there, and that first drop got bigger and the second drop got smaller.
While our last series gave you an origin story of the Chattooga River, today we're looking at the living history. We're sitting down with two absolute legends of the watershed, men who share nearly a century of combined experience on this river. There's Buzz Williams, the conservationist who first paddled here in 1968, back when the river was a secret, and Jack Wise, the guide who arrived in 1981 and watched the river shape not just the rocks and rapids, but entire communities. We're going to talk about what happened when the Deliverance phenomenon turned a quiet mountain river into a crowded highway. We're going to discuss something that blew my mind. A massive rapid, potentially bigger than the famous Five Falls, that is currently sleeping beneath the lake and might just wake up. Everyone talks about the wildness of the Chattooga, but this episode is about something deeper, the soul of the river. Let's find out why it never lets you go. First, let's talk with Buzz Williams.
Come up here, we'd be doing whatever we're doing, camping or paddling these. We paddle these old canoes, aluminum canoes with keels that weren't even made for whitewater, but in the early days, we didn't know what we were doing, but at least we knew our way around. And right after they made that movie Deliverance, is released in 1972, there was what was called the Deliverance syndrome. Everybody wanted to do what Burt Reynolds did, and they came from everywhere. We went from seeing only about 200 people. I mean, we didn't see them, but there were only about 200 people ever in the Chattooga watershed a year at that time. Went to literally tens of thousands, just almost overnight. 4 years after the movie, 4 people died in the Chattooga in the first 4 years because they didn't know what we were doing. I remember I was up at Burroughs Ford one time and met a whole family in the middle of the woods just sitting under a tree crying. And I said, well, what's the deal? And they said, well, they told us to come in and we could put our canoes in at Earl's Ford. But they'd put in at Burroughs Ford.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we saw. It was like, my job as a river ranger for the Forest Service was search and rescue. We were always having to go out and retrieve people from the woods that had no clue what they were doing or where they were.
Jack Wise came in 1981 as a young guide. Today, he runs Wildwater. He built his life in the shadow that Deliverance cast. I asked him about that legacy.
It certainly faded a little bit. You know, we hear about it. There was 8 or 9 years ago, there was the 40th anniversary of the movie. And so a lot of the local tourism agencies kind of picked up on that and really wanted to run with it. And it was very interesting, the local reactions, because especially on the South Carolina side, there was a lot of enthusiasm and interest. But then when you went to the Georgia side, there was a lot of reticent behavior. There was a lot of worried behavior. The local folks did not appreciate the way they were portrayed in the movie Deliverance. They really considered it to be an ugly movie that presented them in a very ugly light, and they were very unhappy about it. Of course, a lot of the actors, other than the marquee actors, were brought from the local community. And so a lot of people from Clayton, Georgia and Dillard, Georgia were in the movie. And again, they didn't exactly realize how they were going to be portrayed until the movie came out. And there's a pretty famous quote, Mrs. Woodall, who lives over on the Georgia side, when the movie was being brought out for its 40th anniversary, was interviewed, and she said, well, basically, having those movie people here was like finding a hair in your biscuit. It just, you didn't enjoy it.
The movie's impact went beyond hurt feelings and dangerous amateurs. It would reshape the very economics of the river. At a congressional hearing about the river's future, one man's testimony would create an accidental monopoly that exists to this day.
So there's a study river. The Natural Resource Committee for Interior and Insular Affairs had hearings like they were supposed to. They asked Claude Terry to come and be a witness. Claude testified, and chairman, I said, Mr. Terry, what's the greatest threat to the Chattooga River? He said, over-commercialization. And at that time, Claude and Wildwater and Nantahala had actually begun to run commercial trips already on the Chattooga. And so the chairman said, Mr. Terry, what do you think we ought to do about that? He said, well, we're going to have to cap the number of outfitters. So that's what he did. They capped the number of outfitters that were working on the Chattooga where it was right there. And so
that's how it became 3.
That's how it became 3. And so whenever Claude testified that the greatest threat was over-commercialization, he, being already a commercial operator, had an instant monopoly. Now, Claude's a good friend of mine, but that's just the truth. You know, that's the way it all laid out.
In our earlier series, we shared Dickey's haunting wish to be buried on the west bank of the Chattooga by the Woodall Shoals, with someone playing dueling banjos over his grave. He wanted the river to give him his deliverance, but later in life, the river had become something he could no longer face.
James Dickey wrote the book, and he felt really bad he felt the overuse of the Chattooga, or the over-peopling of the Chattooga had degraded the wildness and the ability to find solitude or whatever, and really felt kind of like he was in part responsible for some of that. And they were going to give him, that time, they were going to give him an award called South Carolinian of the Year down in Columbia. And, the governor was supposed to be there and all this kind of stuff. They needed a film of Dickey that they were going to show at the presentation. And so they came up in the Forest Service, said, okay, well, we'll facilitate that. And they asked me, I was working for the Forest Service at the time, and I'd kind of be a gopher for this effort to do a film of James Dickey on the Chattooga. Well, as it turned out, I had the opportunity to meet him and found myself and my wife sitting with James Dickey at Woodall Shoals. And my wife, who went to Mount Holyoke, they were talking and mentioned that one of her professors, and he said, that was my roommate in Italy. That's Florence, Italy. And they hit it off because they both had these common interests. So we got to be good friends with James Dickey. And so when they gave him the award, he gave us an invitation. So Nicole and I went down there for this big award ceremony for James Dickey, and governor was there. They had a reception line, and we were in the reception line. And when we got there, he stopped us, and he leaned over and whispered in our ear. He said, I want you to say goodbye to the river for me. And he never saw it again. He said, you can't go back. And I thought if I ever wrote a book, it would be called Say Goodbye to the River for Me.
The river that had whispered its secrets to a handful of locals and adventurers was now shouting to the world, and that shout would transform not just the river, but the very fabric of the communities along its banks. You know, it's one thing to see a river change. It's another to watch an entire community transform around it.
The Chattooga is a special place because of the wild and scenic nature, because of the fact that there's very little development. It's a very rural area. And when I got here in the 80s, Long Creek was an apple town. It was farming community. We were by far the crazy outsiders, the river rats that came here. Every single person who worked at Wildwater lived at Wildwater. And we were a community within a community and just didn't interact a whole lot with the local folks. And for the first few years, when we got started in the 70s, it was actually quite a bit of an antagonism between us just because different cultures clashing. But over time, our additions to the community, whether it was just the financial and the local restaurants and businesses and lodging picking up a little bit of business, the local folks started to see the benefits of having tourism in the area. At the same time, the apple business became harder and harder.
Yeah.
Apples in South Carolina are hard to grow because it's a little bit of a warmer climate. But the advantage is it's a little bit warmer, so the apples came to market a little bit earlier. But then as the globalization of agriculture hit, it was really hard to have apples that were not the best apples, but they were early apples. But when you started refrigerating apples and started shipping apples from cross country, from Washington State, from South America, the small advantage that the apple farmers here had has gone away.
But while Jack was finding his place and growing a family and business in this evolving community, Buzz Williams was on a different kind of journey, one that would take him from loving the river to fighting for it.
Back in the day, the Forest Service was all excited about, we're managing the wild and scenic river, so the Chattooga is classified as either wild or scenic or recreational. If there's a road beside it at 28, it's recreational. You can do more development there. Scenic is a little tighter. Wild, if you can't disturb the bedrock, you can't do any of that. You have to preserve the experience. For the Forest Service, in their excitement to manage the river, decided they were going to go to Bull Sluice. And since so many people go down there right by the road and look at it, they were going to make them safe by going in with a big, heavy piece of equipment and moving all the big boulders around and make a retaining wall, kind of like bleachers at Bull Sluice. This is like 1979, and all the guys were just like incensed. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. And we bucked the Forest Service, and they said, it's basically like, we're going to do it anyway. And so we got the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and we read it from top to bottom, and it said, in a wild area of the Chattooga, you cannot disturb the bedrock. We took a throw rope, a 60-foot throw rope, and measured the distance from the bridge to Bull Sluice, and right below Bull Sluice, it changed from scenic to wild. Right there, when it comes through Bull Sluice is where it changes. You can't disturb the bedrock. We forced them to do an environmental impact statement, and we won. That's what started the whole thing. That was a forerunner to the Chattooga Conservancy. And some of these, and I'm not going to mention these names, but the outfitters were scared to death because here are all their guides bucking the Forest Service, and they're the ones that give them the permit to have a commercial authorization. They said, if you guys participate in this, I don't know how you're going to have our job. They all did it anyway. Screw it. They did it, and we beat them. And that's what the first big conservation fight on the Chattooga was right there, just protecting what the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act says you are by law mandated to do this. You can't do that. And they said, get out, you river guys. We won. We beat them.
But winning one battle doesn't mean the war is over. The threats to the Chattooga have changed, but more subtle, more pervasive, but something harder to fight. The slow creep of progress. Here's Buzz again.
The headwaters is really catching it right now because of all the development. And it has a lot to do with the fact that the economy, of course, drives development. There are people right now that have so much money that I can't even imagine how much money that is. Money means nothing to them. And they are up there in the headwaters now because everything's being developed, it's ripe for development. And some of the golf courses up there, some of the big, huge $4 million houses are just putting tremendous amounts of sediment into the headwaters of the Chattooga right now. We've had to sue a golf course up there and won the suit because it was just hands down. They were just destroyed the creek called Fowler Creek, destroyed it with sediment. And so we have job security right now because of all this development, and it's accelerating, isn't it?
And then the other big change that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years is the woolly adelgid has really attacked the hemlocks in the area. So especially on Section 3 and Section 2, there's huge stretches of river that there's just hundreds of dead trees that are just falling. Most of them collapse into the woods and kind of come apart. A few have fallen into the river and certainly provide some challenges there.
And while the trees are dying above, something remarkable was just discovered below the water. A fish that exists nowhere else on Earth. Here's Buzz.
You have a Bartram bass. It's just been a new species discovered. It's up in the Chattooga. It only lives in the headwaters of the Chattooga River in the Savannah. That's the only place on the planet. Just Bartram bass, just named it, which loves cool, fast-flowing water, usually forested areas. And down in the lake is warm water that's dead that supports the Alabama spotted bass, which is hybridizing with this Bartram bass. And it actually exists in the Kiwi River and several other headwaters of the Savannah River. It's all in severe decline from hybridization from the Alabama bass.
The river still creates, still surprises, and that's where this story bends again from biology to culture. Because while Buzz is fighting to protect what's under the surface, Jack's watching what's drifting away above it, the people.
Things really grew up until about 2000. And then things kind of leveled off for a number of years. And then actually in the last, 10 to 15 years, total river numbers have been dropping. The number of people who go rafting has been dropping as just more and more opportunities come up. I mean, like zipline canopy tours, right? There's a day activity or half day activity that didn't exist before 10 or 12 years ago. And so families just choose different activities. We used to have a third of our business were church groups, and most of those church groups have gone away. And there are a few out there that are still traveling, but the youth of today is so busy that, the idea that they're going to be on a church group weekend or something like that just doesn't seem to fit into people's schedules the way it used to. But in the last 10 or 15 years, it's been more about efficiency. It's been more about, running good trips and bringing people back, and less about needing the extra space, because we don't really need the extra space. And then for the business to survive, diversity has been king. We've built a lot of lodging in the last 5 to 10 years. So lodging is really added on. We added a zip line canopy tour, and that brought more people to the area and gave the people who were coming rafting another activity to do. And then we added canoeing and kayaking, stand-up paddleboarding on the lake, on just different things that would offer additional opportunities, either to bring a different customer or to give the existing customers more to do.
The Chattooga remains wild, but the world around it is still pushing closer and keeps wanting more. Which brings us to the question, what happens next? Let's first go to Jack and then let Buzz share his big thought about what is next.
There was a lot of talk in the 90s and the early 2000s because the rafting companies were growing and we were carrying more people on the river, and there seemed to be more private paddlers. There was a lot of concern about just overpopulating and overrunning the river with people. And those numbers have dropped, and that's been good for the river and been good for everybody's experience. Claude Terry identified pretty early on, even during those growth years, that the long-term challenges to the river are more about incursion of society. The more people that are building closer, the moving of population centers, right? We look at Atlanta moving further and further north, what people consider to be Atlanta. I look at this area in Long Creek and just the number of retirees that are starting to move here. Whereas this used to be agricultural land, there's more and more houses being built, more and more people coming here. And of course, every single construction project, every single septic field and every single well that's drilled just has a little tiny impact on the nature of the area. At what point is there a tipping point, and when is there too many people?
Right,
of course, that's a debate that we could have for
forever.
And forever, right? There's no one answer.
Yeah.
One of our main projects right now is introducing the idea of tearing down Tugelo Dam to extend the Wild and Scenic River down
That way.
all the way to where Yana is, Lake Yana, the next lake below.
Do you think it'll happen?
Well, let's put it this way, that in 2033, they will begin taking comments on relicensing Tugelo Dam. And we're building a case right now. We've hired a lot of experts right now to make an argument that if you did a true cost-benefit analysis of tearing down Tugelo Dam, decommissioning Tugelo Dam, it would be one of the most important things we've ever done here. And the reason is there's no houses down there. The thing is just spewing methane. It's one of the oldest dams around. A third of it is completely sedimented in. It produces almost no power.
So they're not just proposing to restore a habitat, they're also proposing to resurrect a legend.
We got a 1902 survey from Georgia Power that shows a rapid down below under that lake that is bigger than the Five Falls.
Get out.
It's incredible.
Think about that. Somewhere beneath Lake Tougaloo lies a rapid that could rival the Five Falls, Thunder Falls, they called it. Silence for a century. Waiting.
By that time, we built our case and hired the engineers, and we brought people around. It's just not only an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. They'll make the decision in 2035. It'll take them 3 years to tear it down. I'll be 91 years old, and I'm going to run it in a hospital cart.
I have no doubt he will. That's the soul of the river talking, the part that gets into someone like Buzz and won't let go. It is a pull that Jack Wise has seen in thousands of faces over the last 4 decades. He says it's just the most basic human instinct.
Yeah, I mean, water in general, it just attracts human beings, right?
Yeah.
We all want to recreate. We all want to swim. We all want to cool off. We all want to explore.
That simple desire to be near the water comes with a new responsibility. The question that's hung over the river since Deliverance phenomenon. Who will be its steward? After a lifetime of fighting for Bull Sluice, against development, and for Tougaloo Dam's removal, Buzz Williams says he finally sees the answer.
But the good thing about it is I see the young people of this day stepping up. I don't understand exactly why, but I think it has to do with the fact that intuitively, the younger generation sees that the scientific community is telling us without any reservation that unless we change our ways and we start implementing conservation, future generations are going to suffer terribly. Aldo Leopold has a definition of conservation, and he believes it's man being in harmony with nature. My definition of conservation is being willing to give something up for the greater good. Now, I'm not going to let these special interests capture. It's as simple as that. If this generation is not willing to give something up to save future generations, it's a bad situation. And right now, I see the younger people stepping up. And who knows? Maybe things will change. I was in Standing Rock out there at that big protest they had out there. And since I am old, I hung out with the elders. And these guys were just like, hey, man, don't worry about it. This is what's supposed to happen. Things get bad, they go to hell. That's the night. Then there's the morning.
Buzz Williams put it simply. Conservation is being willing to give something up for the greater good. I like that. The river stays, the people change. You know, maybe that's the soul of the Chattooga. Choosing what we're willing to give up so the river doesn't have to say goodbye to us. A huge thank you to Buzz Williams and Jack Wise for sharing their stories and for decades of stewardship on this incredible river. Go see it, whether you want to paddle it yourself or help protect it for the next generation. We've put links to Jack's team at Wildwater and Buzz's work at the Chattooga Conservancy in our show notes. See you next time.